Okay, so we're looking at an IELTS Task 1 essay, and we're analysing figures based on the flow of time, and this time we've got a line graph to look at. So let's take a look at the topic. The graph below shows average carbon dioxide emissions per person in the United Kingdom, Sweden, Italy and Portugal between 1967 and 2007. Summarise the information by selecting and reporting the main features and make comparisons where relevant. Okay. So the first thing that we want to do when we look at a task 1, okay, is we want to think about the time period. Okay, so it's all in the past. So we know that we're going to be using past tense to figure out what's going on. And then we need to look for the main features. So usually I reckon that my students find at least 2 things to talk about in their answer. So in your structure, you'll have your paraphrase, okay, of the topic of the graph. Please. You'll have your overview, okay, of the 2 main trends that you're going to talk about, and then you'll give details about trend number 1, and then you'll give details about trend number 2. Okay, so overall, you'll have about 3 paragraphs. So let's take a look at this chart. So we've got average CO2 emissions per person in this time period. So it's over a 40-year time period. So you can think about how you'd paraphrase that: over 40 years, over 4 decades, because decades is 10 years. Okay, and so the first thing I'm thinking when I look at this is these 2 countries, Sweden and the United Kingdom, are both decreasing. Okay, so the UK is like a steady decrease, Sweden goes up and then down. Okay, and then I'm thinking Italy and Portugal both increase. Okay, so that's a very clear and that's a very easy divide. So you can do the countries that decrease and then you can do the countries that increase. Okay, so that's a sort of a nice easy split to do it. And then you want to be making comparisons between them. Okay, so you want to be using all your comparative switching language. Let's look and see what this candidate's done. The given chart illustrates how the average carbon dioxide emissions per person differ among 4 different nations. So we've got differ among 4 different nations. Differ among, you can just say 4 nations. Probably even say 4 European nations because they're all in Europe. Data is presented in 10-year time intervals from 1967 to 2007, and the measurement is in metric tons. Okay, so this is a pretty nice paraphrase and description of the graph. They've tried to paraphrase like the title. They've given a little bit of description about it. Yeah, there's a couple of grammar issues, but overall I think that's pretty good. So then we've got the overview section. Overall, it's clear that the UK and Sweden had a decreasing trend of CO2 emissions, while Italy and Portugal had an increasing trend within the 40-year period. So that's a perfect overview. Okay, so you've given me the trend, the increase and the decrease, without giving me the specific details, because that's hopefully going to come next. So trend number 1. The UK had a relatively steady decrease over 40 years with no significant drop or jump. This is a really nice sentence. I like how they've sort of calmly described it. I like this phrase, relatively steady. So you've got a combination of 2 adverbs here, which is nice to see. The figure started at around 10.7 metric tons of CO2 emissions, then decreased by approximately 2 metric tons from 1967 to 2007. Sweden also had a decrease overall. However, in the first 10 years, the figure increased from about 8.7 to around 10.3 metric tons before declining to 5.5 metric tons until declining to by 2007. Let's take a look. Yeah, Sweden has gone down to 5.5, by 2007. So if they leave it as until 2007, that's kind of, are they doing 5.5 every year, like a decline of 5.5? That's the kind of impression it gives me. So you want to say by 2007. So I think this is a nice paragraph. It's easy to read, easy to follow. It doesn't feel super list-like. We've got some comparison here. We're saying that they're both the same. We've got the detail, and it's pretty grammatically accurate. So pretty good so far. With regards to the carbon emissions from Italy, they began at around 4.2 metric tons and then gradually increased with some fluctuations until the peak at around 7.8 metric tons in 1997. In the last 10 years, the figure remained at 7.8 metric tons. Likewise, approximately 1.3 metric tons of carbon dioxide were emitted in Portugal in 1967. So we've got a comparison word here. After which the figure increased steadily with a slight drop in 1987 and continued to increase to a high of 5.3 metric tons in 2007. Okay, so they've listed out what happened to Italy, then they've said, well, this is what happens to Portugal. But what I want to see is I want to see more comparison. So they've just described exactly what happened in the graph. So I think you want to do more comparison throughout. So both countries had a steady increase between 1967 and 1977, both increasing by about, can we say 2? So it's going from 1 to 3 and going from 4 to 6. So you want to have a sentence here perhaps that says something like both countries, or between 1967 and 1977. I think those are the dates. Yeah. Both countries saw a steady increase of around 2 metric tons, although I think it's Portugal that starts below. Yeah, Portugal. Although Portugal started from a lower base. Okay, so can you see how you're kind of combining the two countries together more rather than describing, having one comparison word and then describing? So it makes it easier to see the trend if you're like discussing them both at the same time rather than just listing numbers, which are hard to hold in your head. So that would be my main feedback to this candidate. So in terms of task achievement, they do a pretty good job of exploring the main trends and describing them. So probably come out at a 6.0. I really would like to see them do more comparison throughout their sentences rather than just having one linking word. Cohesion and coherence, again, I thought it was fine. I'd give a 6 for that. They had good linking words. Everything was logically structured. They had paragraphs. Vocabulary also I thought was quite impressive. So I would give a 6.5 vocabulary. And then grammar, I would give a 6 for grammar. There's a couple of minor errors, but nothing really huge. Perhaps some more complex sentences would be necessary. So I think definitely overall a comfortable 6. I think they could be pushing a 6.5. I could see someone arguing with me to increase the grammar up a little bit. I would like to see them use more connectives. And that will happen if more comparison throughout will lead to an increase in more connective language naturally. Okay, so that's what I think this candidate should work on. But overall, very solid task 1 essay, a good job, and I think definitely a solid 6 at least.